Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Founders Crate. Today we have Aaron. Aaron is the founder of Izba Consulting. Aaron, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
So, give us a brief background about yourself, what you've been doing prior to Izba Consulting.
Sure. So I'm a supply chain guy through and through. I studied supply chain at Ohio State University and went to work at Unilever after I graduated. I was lucky enough to get into their management trainee program where I basically like to say that I got 10 years of experience in about 3 years. I worked on a factory floor, managing a production team of about 90 people. I ran an import-export group for North America. I did everything from business waste and forecasting, and it was just a fantastic time. And I really thought that I was going to be at Unilever for 25 or 30 years. I was moving up quickly. I really enjoyed what I was doing, but was missing something, and that was e-commerce. I felt that was really the way that the world was going, and wanted to be involved in it. And so started to meet some people and started consulting on nights and weekends. Ended up joining a company called Hubble Contacts before they launched, and was the founding chief supply chain officer of Hubble. And at Hubble, I helped found and source the factories, the fulfillment centers, the parcel contracts, the packaging. I was able to build everything from the ground up. And it was a fantastic experience being there with that team, and was there for about a year. I was responsible for customer service, supply chain quality, regulatory, and really wanted to stay in the supply chain world. Was consulted with a number of other companies, was COO at a company called Sustain Natural, and then just saw this dynamic play out over and over again where companies needed full-time or Fortune 500 level expertise, but weren't able to afford it on a full-time basis. And so that was the genesis of starting Izba Consulting. We are a fractional COO company that brings that Fortune 500 level expertise to companies of all different shapes and sizes. So we work with companies that are pre-revenue, companies that raise tens of millions of dollars, and also large public companies who are trying to act like startups. And we've done everything from CPG companies to consumer electronics, apparel, medical devices, things like that.
Got it. So going forward, so what were the early days of Izba Consulting like? Leaving a multinational, a Fortune 500 company, then coming up with your own consulting, it does come up with its own challenges, right? So what were the early days like?
Yeah, the early days of Izba were involved a lot of walking around and networking, and I think I probably met someone in almost every Starbucks in central Manhattan. And it was difficult. I mean, starting a company is hard, and anybody who tells you otherwise is not being honest. But it was also really rewarding. There were times where I would go out and work the entire day and not really have a whole lot to show for it. And there are other days where it just felt like you're on top of the world.
Got it. So going forward, COVID has acted as a catalyst for multiple industries, while it has been not good for the other ones, right? So how do you see this space evolving for your industry?
Yeah, I think just broadly, you're absolutely right. COVID has been a catalyst for things that were already happening, in my opinion. You look at the shift from retail to e-commerce. You look at the trend of offshoring onto onshoring. I think remote working is one of those things that fits into that very nicely. And the world's not going to be the same afterward. There's not going to be a normal that we go back to. It's just going to be different. And so as we're restructuring large parts of the economy, I think that that remote working and this new regime that we're in of people mixing work and life is going to be much more the commonplace.
Interesting. So just key tricks and trades of how to manage remote teams in efficient ways, because remote work is something which will the typical technology companies or small startups, they're more used to it, but the traditional companies, they have these myths or taboos of the servers, nothing can go out, everything needs to stay in-house. But because of COVID, everyone has been forced to work remotely, right? So the key three ingredients of how to have a successful remote team. I'm talking about larger teams, not about 10 to 15, more than 1,000 teams, of how to manage them in more efficient, better ways.
Yeah, I think remote working at its core is really about trust. And if the trust doesn't exist between the employer and the employee, you're not going to be successful with remote working or in office working for that matter. And so when it comes to the keys there, I kind of start and end with trust. And how do you make sure that when you see that dot pop up on Slack or on Instant Messenger, that someone is actually online, that you trust that they're there and not just watching Netflix and moving their mouse. And when they're not online, how do you trust that they're not just paying attention or things like that? And so I think that that's an important thing. The other pieces that are important when you're managing a large team is making sure that the decision rights and the chain of command are clear. When you are sitting across from someone or you see someone on a regular basis, it's much easier for you to talk to them and remind them of something that you learned from another meeting that is probably pertinent to them. And so I think having very clearly defined decision rights and understanding who needs to be informed about something, who needs to be consulted, your typical RACI model is another key piece that you need to be able to do. And I'd say the last thing that's related to trust is making sure that people feel like they still belong somewhere. Our company is completely remote. We're in every time zone in the United States and work with companies and clients around the world. And it's still very important that we find time to be remote together. And whether that means that we are on and we have scheduled team meetings where it's not necessarily about business, but it's about each other, or it might be something where we are physically getting together and trying to work remotely. I think those sorts of things that you can do to engender that trust and to help people feel like they belong is important. When something bad happens, when the business is in a difficult time, those small acts of camaraderie, of culture, those are the things that really pay dividends when you're in a difficult situation.
Got it. Interesting. Aaron, thank you so much for being on the show. We would have loved to continue, but my marketing team tells me I have to keep it within 8 to 10 minutes. Otherwise, I'm pretty sure we could have talked for an hour at least. It just was an interesting conversation. Thank
Absolutely.
you so much for being on the show. Take care of yourself.
Thanks for having me.